President, we're going to start this morning with the general government section. And the first item up is the governor's proposal for the Department of Consumer Affairs. And finance, we actually, members, our staff did a chart, partly because we were kind of going crazy trying to understand this proposal, that I think all of you have now. Does finance have one too? I mean, yeah, we did ours. This is all the different, we tried to break down the boards. What's the backlog? Are there fee increases associated with it? Those kinds of issues, so we could actually understand what we were dealing with. So we're all trying to figure out why it takes 5 years to process a complaint at optometry. Finance?
Good morning. Kristen Shelton, Department of Finance. The governor's budget proposed 138 positions in 2011-12 with a kind of a phasing in of those positions in 2010-11 for a total position count or PY personnel year account of 107 positions. These positions are needed to take the average processing time frame for complaints and investigation and prosecution of those complaints from 3 years down to a 12 to 18 month cycle. Based on our analysis of the proposal, we proposed a phasing in of these positions, recognizing that there's a number of positions being added at one time. The vast majority of the positions would not begin until October 1st, with approximately 8 positions beginning in January. We think that this proposal is basically appropriate in terms of how it's being brought in and when it's being phased, and that DCA, the Department of Consumer Affairs, has provided us with an achievable hiring plan to support those positions. Keeping in mind that this deals with 18 individual healing arts boards, there is really, most of the boards are hiring less than 5 positions. So while the 140 positions or 138.5 positions may seem daunting, it's spread across 18 individual hiring entities that can do the hiring, the screening process, and actually fill those positions.
So you're saying that you can do 107 positions in a budget year?
We're very confident that the department can hire 138 positions, which is equivalent to 107 personnel years, which is what was accepted by the Assembly, primarily because it's not as if it's the Employment Development Department trying to hire 300 positions, 500 positions, which they were successfully able to do, but it's more like a number of very small departments hiring less than 5 positions per department. There's only 3 of the 18 healing arts boards that are hiring more than 20 positions. That would be the medical board, the pharmacy board, and the nursing board. So the vast majority are hiring 5 or less positions.
But these folks have to have some specialty knowledge or something, right?
There are both generalist and specialist classifications. The primary specialized classification is really the investigative positions, and it's really in obtaining records, conducting investigations, how you document those investigations, and then making recommendations as it moves forward through the process. Each of the individual boards will hire people and train them in terms of understanding their specific code sections that they're working under, but they don't require specialized knowledge of the medical profession, for instance. They have subject matter experts that would be in helping give advice and that type of thing.
And is this finance's trailer bill language or the proposed modified trailer bill language?
That is a proposed modified trailer bill language that the Department of Finance provided during the subcommittee process, kind of towards the tail end, that is really essential to be able to hire non-sworn investigators rather than sworn investigators, which are currently used. That's the trailer bill that's critical to be able to implement the proposal before you.
And all of these positions are funded from the special funds associated with the respective board?
Correct. They're entirely funded by the special funds of the various licensing entities. So there's actually 22 different funding sources that support these positions, and it's predominantly funded through the license and renewal fees of those people that would be monitored. Just for your reference, I know that the staff analysis indicates a number of fee increases. Those are largely triggered to on the natural they would occur, irrespective of whether you adopt the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative. The only fee increase that results as a result of this initiative as proposed before you is in the Psychiatric Technicians Fund, and they would require a fee increase in 2011, 2012. It would be about a 5% increase in the application or exam fee and up to a 30% increase in the initial and renewal license fee.
But they don't have any backlog.
This proposal doesn't take into account any type of backlog. It is really based on the workload that's before them, the number of complaints that come into the door. So while they may have a lower processing time than the other boards, they are still need to come down in terms of their processing investigation timeline.
All right, LAO?
Russia Chavez with the Legislative Analyst Office. Based on the workload and what the department is proposing to do here, their workload is justified, but at this time it'd be something that the legislature, Madam Chair, that you guys would want to consider going forward with something like this at this time.
That's a little dicey. Mr. Blumenfeld?
I have a question. Are other states also, do they measure their complaint time in years like this? I mean, it just seems outrageous to me that 5 years, 4 years for a complaint or even 3 years.
Right. That is the exact reason we have this proposal before you.
But how did it get to this place, and how does it compare to other states?
Right. Our processing time is much greater than other states in terms of handling investigations and complaints. This is largely accepted over time because there were many handoffs present in the complaint investigation process. What we're actually doing here is we're bringing down the investigative staff to kind of the lowest possible level and putting them within each of the different healing arts boards, which will speed up that process. But everybody kind of generally accepted it. It was
it like this, let's
very
say,
much a status
8 years ago?
quo. Absolutely.
Was it 10 years ago?
We didn't go back that far, but we did look back at the last 5 to 8 years. And
so just this administration?
No, I think it was really the status quo that kind of was accepted as new directors came in, and I would say that Director Steger, as he came into the Department of Consumer Affairs, based on his experience with the Chiropractic Board, started questioning that status quo and began to look at ways to reduce that time, because it's not acceptable from a consumer protection standpoint to allow 3 years or upwards of 3 years to go by before a complaint that comes into the office to be resolved. This initiative gets it into the 12 to 18-month timeline.
Yeah.
Senator Dutton?
Yeah, I think actually Member Bloomfield, he actually touched on it, because it's been the process that we've had up to date. It's been kind of antiquated. A lot of the investigation, as I understand, used to be up to the Attorney General's office, and so the delay took place because there was a time delay between these various boards and the Attorney General's office in order to do the basic investigation that was necessary before they could take action on licensees. But I'm also wondering about breakdown between the various levels of employees within these various departments. Anybody take a look at the ratio between like supervisor and staff versus exec to see if we're in balance there? I'm always kind of concerned whether maybe in some areas we may be a little top heavy. Maybe we don't have enough people at the staff level in comparison. Do you look at those types of ratios as far as making sure that we aren't top heavy and too many chiefs, not enough Indians, so to speak?
While it varies from board to board, the predominant workers within each of the different healing arts boards and across all the consumer affairs organizations are actually at quite low levels. They range from office techs that might do the initial intake of a complaint, staff services analysts, associate governmental program analysts, and then the investigators. And by using non-sworn investigators, it's far more cost effective and more efficient. There's a small number of supervisors. I believe we applied a 1 to 10 ratio. in terms of the managers in this proposal, which is largely consistent with Consumer Affairs. I would say they're not a top-heavy organization.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nielsen and then Senator Lowenthal.
Just so that we're not losing personnel years and going to solve the problem.
Endemic and historic situation in DCA. Protocols, policies, and procedures. Is someone really watching over and monitoring, and is there a real laser-like focus on the protocols, policies, and procedures? Because the staff alone are not the solution.
We completely concur. The department has actually already embarked on this initiative in terms of looking at the way in which they take in complaints and how they process complaints. They've established an executive officer at the Department of Consumer Affairs executive level to monitor. 8 of the positions that are requested and before you today are actually for a performance metrics unit so that they can monitor these boards' performance, make sure that they're implementing best practices across the Department of Consumer Affairs spectrum, and that they're being evaluated as they go. They also, when this proposal came before us, we suggested that they do an internal review and validation. They completed that. That was shared with your legislative staff in May, where an independent vendor came in and validated the proposal that they were seeking, the things that they've done internally already to streamline processes. So I think they're well on their way, and it's a multi-pronged effort, not just a resource effort.
Okay, on the sworn officer, now I'm familiar in government with inspector class. Are not most of the inspector class sworn officers, or there are a number of exceptions now?
There are sworn investigators or peace officer type classifications, but many departments also use a non-sworn classification. Consumer Affairs has largely not done that. They've had their division of investigations, which uses sworn peace officers to evaluate, but one of the ways in which they're going to fill their positions is using non-sworn kind of senior investigator positions through a broad statewide initiative tied to the HR modernization project. So I think that there's a large enough need that they're putting an online exam in place at the Department of Personnel Administration. And again, we're trying to bring in the lowest possible level to deal with the complaint workload in a much more timely fashion.
Well, I'm kind of resistant, but you might get me there in this particular case.
Mr. Lowenthal.
Yeah, I noticed that some have fee increases and some do not. Can you say what is the criteria for determining that, and is it done at each board level?
We evaluate the various funds and essentially try to remain at a 3-month reserve for each of the funds for any kind of unanticipated expenditures. We compare current expenditures and current revenues. We consider the length of time that it's been since there's been any kind of fee increase. Just to make a clarification, though, there is only one fund that's affected by the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative that will require a fee increase.
Really?
The other funds that are identified by your staff are fee increases in progress based on their existing expenditure and revenue levels. They're not tied to the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative. And many of those have not had fee increases since 1991, 1996, 1993. So it's been many years before there's been any kind of change in their fees. And this is really driven by natural changes in their budget or other budget change proposals that have been adopted over time, not the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative.
Mr. Leno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before you began your presentation, I was leaning toward the Senate version, thinking that these 107 positions were going to be quite a large number to take on in a budget year. But you made a very convincing argument. But there's one bit of curiosity on the chart, which I hope you could clarify for me. So the idea, the concept behind bringing on all these new people is that we have these extremely long process complaint periods. But I'm looking at a couple of the boards which have the shortest process complaint period, 2.5 years and 2.6 years. for the medical board and the pharmacy board, and they're getting the most people, whereas the 5.1 year for the optometry is getting the fewest. So it seems counterintuitive.
Essentially, what we did is we looked at the complaint workload over the past 3 years, 2006-7, 2007-8, 2008-9, and we evaluated or projected what their workload would be in 2010-11. Those 3 boards that you mentioned have some of the very biggest licensing populations that are out there. So if you think about they're going to have many more licensees in order to process those complaints, and then keeping in mind that even though they're at 2 years or 2.5 years, our intended outcome is to get them to 12 or at the outside 18 months. So you still need to resource that in order to do that.
Okay, I think that answers the question then why the medical board and the pharmacy board, though only relatively only 2.5, 2.6, because you want to get them down to 12 months, 18
Right.
months, and they're large universes of complaints, so they're going to need the 17 or 22. But then why would the 5.1 year complaint process for optometry, do they not even need a full person?
Optometry has very few licensees. And so based on, I don't have the data right in front of me, but my recollection is that they have probably an organization of less than 20 positions overall to deal with their licensing population. Again, we really looked back at their existing workload, projected their new workload, took into account the positions that they already had to deal with the workload, and they really just need to bring a part of a person into their organization to kind of do that at their level rather than having their cases go to the Division of Investigation. So it makes sense for them to have just a small number of positions.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to follow your lead, but I think Finance has made an uncommonly strong case.
Well,
And then lastly, with regard to the trailer bill language, I think that really is more for policy committee.
Yeah, when you say Division of Investigation, are those positions being redirected into this? So why do they still exist if we're changing their model? Because I'm with Senator Leno on the optometry issue. That sounds like then what you're describing is that it's all about process and procedures that haven't been fixed. So, and if it's the Division of Investigation that's holding up the show, at least maybe move all of those positions, and then we don't have to hire new people so much as redirect some of them.
There is a myriad of the types of complaints that might come before a particular healing arts board. Some of them are criminal complaints, criminal charges, criminal convictions. In those instances, you're still going to need to utilize the Division of Investigations. They still have a role in this process.
But won't their workload go down, and therefore can't we redirect
their
some
workload
of them?
likely could go down. We didn't contemplate any redirections for them at this point in time, and we are going to monitor that and reevaluate it in 2 years after we see what the impact is of this initiative, because we don't know where in that continuum we're going to have the largest workload, but we're trying to bring it down to the lowest possible level. There's still a role for the Division of Investigations. There's a tremendous amount of workload that's actually in the queue, so needs to be processed and move forward using this new model and this new structure. So I think you would likely see something regarding the Division of Investigations in the next couple of years.
And how much of this workload would we have reduced had we not had a 15% furlough this year?
You know, the furloughs really didn't play into the number of positions that we were evaluating. And the reason for that, as I noted previously, is we used a baseline average of 3 years, 2006-7, 2007-8, 2008-9. At that point in time, we really only had impact of about 8 days of furlough time taken. So when we looked back, we looked at processing times in the last 3 years. We really didn't consider the 2008-9 workload or the 2009-10 workload that was affected by furloughs. And then because the furlough program was being suspended beginning July 1st of 2010, we really projected the actual number of complaints that we expected to came in, and then staffed it that way. So the furlough didn't, because of timing, didn't play into the analysis and the need for the positions at Consumer Affairs.
I'm not completely convinced. Senator Dutton?
Yeah, a couple of follow-up questions. A lot of this restructuring stuff, this came as a result of what happened with nurses earlier this year. Is that probably part of it?
It certainly played into it. It was unfortunate timing at the same time.
Because I know that was their problem, is that they were having trouble getting the investigative part done before they could take action. I know it was one of the problems. My question had to do with, we've had a history of borrowing money from special funds. How many of these boards have outstanding loans owed to them from general fund transfer or loans?
There are a number of these boards that had larger surpluses or fund balances in their funds that do have general fund loans outstanding requiring repayment. As a result of this Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative, we've actually already identified and captured in our general fund totals the repayment of 3 loans that will be necessary. $2 million for the nursing board, and then about $500,000 or $5 million in 11-12 for the dental board and the occupational therapy board combined.
So we're proposing fee increases for what purpose?
They
have all the ones that you've got indicated for fee increases. Are these ones that have outstanding loans to them?
The dental board has an outstanding loan, but there was budget control language when those loans were initiated that prevents us from increasing fees prior to any repayment of the loan. And as we look at the surplus or the balance in the dental board fund, there's enough funds that they don't even require a loan repayment, let alone a fee increase until 2011, 2012.
Then why are you doing a fee increase?
The dental board fee increase, we are not I misspoke. We're not tracking a dental board fee increase. This may be identified here because the dental assistance fund is going to require a fee increase based on their existing workload, not because of the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative.
No, this sheet I've got here has both dental board and dental assistants having fee increases, so I don't know.
I'm not certain where that came from.
Are some of them perhaps just sort of natural fee increases? I mean,
The vast majority are natural fee
CPI
increases.
type.
If you denied CPEI, we would still be required to increase fees for the majority of the boards identified in the handout provided by
It's kind of hard to justify a fee increase if we actually owe them money.
And we concur with you. We would not do it. We would have to approve any fee increases, whether they be regulatory or we would weigh in if they're statutory fee increases. And we would not approve anything until we've repaid the loan. For the dental board, for instance, we would repay their $4.4 million loan
Can you provide
in
me with a
11-12.
list of special funds that currently have outstanding loans owed to them
Absolutely.
from the general fund? If
Yes,
you could,
we would be
maybe
happy to
give it
provide
the rest
that.
of the committee too. Thank you.
yeah, I don't think they're asking us to approve these. We just noted them because we weren't sure how much was tied to, there are fee increases that are being done administratively, right? They're not asking us to approve them exactly. It was more for a matter of information as to whether this initiative was causing fee increases that we
Just for clarification, are you particularly interested in the Department of Consumer Affairs outstanding loans, or do you want a department-wide report that would be outside of my area? I know I have something.
I plan to ask
Consumer
everybody
Affairs.
who's coming up here to give me a chart on, or give me
So now
some
it's
kind of a
Mr.
schedule on
Drew's
all
job.
outstanding loans that are owed to any of the special funds by, because of transfers or loans that have been made to the general fund.
All right, so Mr. Drew will take charge of that.
Yeah.
Mr. Lowenthal.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're going to get, as your benchmark, as your performance standard, that by 2012-13 you're going to reduce the processing, the intake investigation and process from 3 years down to 12 to 18 months. With this increase next year, how much do you intend, when we come back next year, will we see a decrease?
A decrease in terms of the processing
Yeah,
time?
we're giving you now, you're going to be
Right.
hiring potentially 107 PYs. Are we going to see a decrease by next year?
I think that you'll see that these figures are starting to tick down,
How much?
partly because the Consumer Affairs has already initiated some activities in the current year within current resources to adjust this. My guess is I wouldn't want to tell you or commit to you that we would be at the 18-month mark or the 12-month mark, because that's going to take a fully ramped-up program, which doesn't happen until 2011-12. But I think it's very safe to assume that the vast majority will be under a 2-year time frame, and that we'll be edging
So
closer
when we
to
come
the
back
18
next
months.
year to do this wonderful process one more time, we will see this 3-year down to less than 2 years.
I would say that 2 years is virtually safe and could be very assured. I don't want to commit beyond that, as I'm not the director of that department, and I don't want to hold him to that. But I think they're very committed. They have good process and procedures in place, and once they get the additional resources, continue to work with the Attorney General's office where they fit in. They're very much on track.
All right, we'll hold your feet to the fire.
Mr. Nielsen.
There's an underlying issue, and I just generally entreat analysts in finance to be looking at this. The concern I have is the accrual of these funds in all over pots in government, where then we have budget troubles and we covet them to borrow from. The signal to me is we ought not be accruing such balances. Maybe we are overfeeing the professions, and it happens in all agency budgets. So and I follow on Senator Dutton's issue. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions about this, and like to see a kind of a comprehensive review of how many pots we've accrued and at what rates, and maybe we just have too much. I'm kind of leaning toward the Assembly version here, and I concur with Senator Leno that maybe we leave this inspector thing, peace officer, to be a policy issue to be dealt with.
So leave the trailer bill for policy? Okay. Mr. Nielsen moves the Assembly version minus trailer bill. What am I hearing?
Fine with me.
Okay. Mr. Lowenthal's an aye. Senator Dutton's an aye. Mr. Huff is an aye. Mr. Leno already said he was an aye. Is that a 5-0-5-0? All right. Took us a while, but we
Madam
got
Chair?
there. Yes, ma'am.
I certainly recognize and appreciate the concern about the trailer bill language and the need for policy committees to weigh in on this. But there are, for sure, two pieces of this trailer bill that need to clarify, because the medical board and the dental board are currently authorized only to hire sworn investigators. And so if you don't give them the authority to hire non-sworn investigators, then
I get it. I mean, the cost of this would go up if you're not able to do the... Why don't we at least...
I would ask that you leave the trailer bill open.
Let's leave the trailer bill open, but what we will do is refer it to our policy committees for review. And I get that it may need to be a trailer bill for you to be able to do this rather than a policy bill in the regular sense of the word. But I think we'd all be more comfortable with the policy committees at least reviewing the language. So if we can accomplish that in the next week or so, then we can come back to it and see if there's any amendments to it. And then Mr. Giroux will be charged with trying to figure out how to get everybody the information they want on the special fund balances throughout, loan balances and stuff, right? All right, moving ahead. Okay, so I'm going to put trailer bill open. And then staff, we refer it to the policy committee staffs, and let's see all 4 caucus policy committee staffs to see what thoughts everybody has. All right, page 2, licensed professional clinical counselors. Finance?
Jeff Carasone, Department of Finance. The governor's budget requested 12 special fund positions and $1.1 million special fund for the licensure and regulation of professional clinical counselors, interns, and counselor trainees pursuant to SB 788 of last year. We support the Assembly action, which approved our proposal as budgeted.
Surprise. Leo?
We would recommend, if you should so choose, to go with the Senate action on this one.
Because
based on the workload, the 5 positions still could achieve where the board would like to get now, and then they could still come back in the future budget years to request for another augmentation.
I guess my biggest question was why we aren't delaying this. We're delaying, there's a bill from, I don't know, 5 years ago that was trying to get people to oversee guardians in courts, and I think for 5 years we've delayed the implementation of it. Why is this one so urgent that we implement it when we're delaying other?
I think the simple answer is the other legislation was a general fund cost in the court's budget for the conservatorships.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
Conservatorship.
Yeah, so that's a $17 million general fund cost, whereas this is a special fund cost.
But is there some urgency to approving these positions and doing this? I'm just
Well,
recall the bill particularly.
the consequences of not approving the full complement of positions would be delaying individuals' entry into the workforce. Right now, the wait time is about 2 months. That would double to 4.
Whoa. If it's 2 months now with the existing staff, why will it double to 4 if I don't increase the staff?
Well, the wait times would increase for the applications to be reviewed and to be licensed. With the,
Oh, because they aren't licensed now.
It's a new group of people.
Mr. Nielsen, Senator Dutton. Senate, Assembly. Senate. All right.
Okay.
Senate's only one position. Senate. Okay. Senate. 5050. Oh, boy. The Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education. Finance.
The governor's budget proposed 71 special fund positions and 8.7 million special funds to reestablish the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education pursuant to AB 48 of last year. We support the Assembly action less the budget bill language.
Why does it need so many more people than it used to have when it existed prior to 2008?
There's currently a backlog of 317 applications, and they're getting 70 additional applications every month, and this is to reduce that.
But how much did they used to get when they were?
I'd have to get back to you on that.
I mean, I don't recall the specifics of this bill, but did it have new duties beyond what the former board had? I mean, I even think the Senate's high on this one. Is there trailer bill language too? Assembly trailer bill? I mean, what are their new duties under this?
Pardon me?
My notes say the old one only had 58 people.
Okay, I'd have to verify that.
The 317 application backlog is because we haven't had one for 2 years, right?
Yes, ma'am, I believe so.
So who was doing this? And was Consumer Affairs overseeing this? I mean, Governor vetoed the trailer bill, the bill that was trying to reestablish this 4 times over those 2 years. So I'm trying to figure out, and they thought you didn't need one because somehow it was being handled through Consumer Affairs. But
I don't know.
Lelio?
This was handled previously with the Bureau of Private Posts under Consumer Affairs, and the number that you were asking about previously, about the actual positions they had before, in 2006-07, they had about 55.4 positions, and the year before that, 2005-2006, they had an actual of 58.2 positions.
In 0506,
05-06.
they had the 58. That's where we got that one. So I'm trying to figure out why I need more than 50 today. All right, Mrs. Skinner.
Well, my understanding is that this division or department was completely reworked, and so it's to compare its staffing levels before to what's being proposed now is like apples and oranges because it's been completely reworked.
So what are they doing? Does anybody know, though? I don't know what the difference between the bill that was approved, the 3 bills that were vetoed, and the legislation that was from the 70s or 80s is. Does anybody? I mean, I don't know what it's doing
I can
differently.
certainly get back to you with more clarification.
Mr. Dutton?
Yeah, right now, we're kind of leaning with the Senate version with the Assembly budget bill language, and the trailer bill language, I think we're okay with that, too. We just got this, that's all.
Let's do that. Senate plus the trailer bill language.
Senate, P-WISE, Assembly, TBL, and no budget bill, or yes budget bill? No budget bill.
Just trailer.
Just trailer bill, no budget bill.
Well, I'm okay with we're okay with the budget bill. The trailer bill, though, we just got this, so wasn't it?
That's just feel-good language, isn't it? It doesn't really do anything that's not already done. It just feels good that we've got it in there.
I don't know whether we need it. Mr. Leno?
On the proposed budget bill language, could someone explain its purpose?
Whose language was it anyway?
Assembly?
But it wasn't the governor's?
Yeah,
The budget bill language in front of you requires that
Oh, no,
5
we don't
of
want
the
that.
positions
No, that's no.
are special ed positions and that they're located in Sacramento. The Assembly bill the bill that was for this does require that 5 of the positions need to be special ed positions, but the department could use the 60 that are approved, PYs here that are approved, and make those 5 positions special ed positions without the budget bill language.
My question is why is the Sacramento office called out for 5?
And it doesn't say special ed positions, it just says specialist positions. It says specialist.
Specialist positions.
The budget bill language for this item is not necessary because it
Okay.
can be
So we-
handled with the 60
Okay,
PYs.
so we get rid
And
of
it's in a policy bill.
Madam Chair, if we could, we do have some additional information on how the prior law differs from the new
Thank you.
enforcement.
All right.
Just for clarification purpose, the previous Bureau of Private Post-Secondary essentially did the majority of their work in-house in Sacramento. They did not have a tremendous presence out in the field to do enforcement. The new law exempted some previous institutions from their oversight, but also then required them to do biannual to every 2 years actual site visits with out in the field. So this proposal has more positions, but 12 of which are
In the
limited
field.
term. So, well, they're spread throughout California, both in Northern California and Southern California, and then a portion of those positions are actually limited term. So we had 12 positions that would help deal with the backlog and then would phase out over time.
All right. Well, you should still do that. The trailer bill language, you have any comments on the trailer bill language?
The trailer bill language was offered or proposed, I believe, to just have the Bureau of State Audits look at or review the staffing structure because
that's
there
what
was
it is.
much
It's an audit
discussion during the committee.
I see.
The original legislation, though, provided an appropriation of $270,000 for the Bureau of State Audits. Should you require them to do additional work, you may need to either appropriate additional money as part of your trailer bill amendment in that chapter or in that legislation, or provide additional funds or resources to the Bureau of State Audits in the future.
Okay, so if we wanted to do this, you could actually just ask for a state audit. I mean, we could do
Correct.
a JLAC audit
I think
request.
that the plan was that the $270,000 would be paid for by the licensing fees for the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary versus being funded out of the state audit fund.
So there's already an audit required in existing statute, though.
There's an audit required that has them look at the new structure and how that is working. The language that's proposed would have them
Would add
also
the
look at
duties.
the staffing. So is the staffing appropriate for the type of workload that they're going to have to do? Because this was largely some guesswork. There were some old tasks that carried forward, but there were also new tasks. And given other DCA programs, the staffing level that was included and adopted by the Assembly basically addressed that additional workload.
All right, Ms. Skinner?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that that's correct. The purpose of the Assembly's trailer bill is to make sure that audit also addresses the staffing levels and reviews them. So while of course I think the budget bill is also good, it is in a existing bill that's going through our houses right now, so we could just act on the Senate's recommendation plus the trailer bill and allow that which is addressed in the Assembly's budget bill to just happen through the policy process.
All right, that would be Senator Dutton's motion. Is there any objection?
No, on the trailer bill, though, we were going to suggest we ought to, probably have policy review on that because we just got this. That's what I've seen.
Well, you want to delay this and just to review the trailer bill language? It's really just what they're saying. It's to add direction
we just
to the
got the
auditor.
proposed trailer bill language just now.
Yeah, I know.
On the surface, it looks like we'd be in favor of it, but
All right, well, why don't we just keep it open for a little while, see if we can come back to it today, give everybody a chance to
Okay.
just look at the
Thank
trailer
you.
bill. I think that the pending motion would be Senate positions with trailer bill. But just let everybody kind of get a minute to review it. All right. Page 4, OPR.
Jason Cisney, LAO.
Finance? Oh, LAO.
This committee began the process of thinking about OPR last year with an initial move to eliminate it. The governor brought forward a similar proposal in the January budget. The Assembly denied that request, deferring to various policy bills that are moving to look at changing the role of OPR in the future. The Senate acted to also to deny the elimination of OPR, but approved the elimination of quite a few positions, ones the governor had proposed for eliminating, plus a few more, principally providing policy and bill support to the governor's office to achieve roughly the same amount of general fund savings. We recommend the Senate, but recognizing the legislature's interest in potentially in expanding the role of OPR, we would just note that if the legislature wants to go down that road, probably at some point in the future you're going to need to probably start off with something like the Senate actions, because the positions that the Senate eliminates really probably won't be useful if the legislature's direction is to make OPR into more of a comprehensive planning and land use agency. So this does have a lot of connections to policy bills that are in motion now.
Finance?
Jennifer Osborne, Department of Finance. We recognize that the Senate version does make an attempt to streamline state government, which was the original intent of our proposal, but we would continue to support our proposal, which would eliminate OPR and would
But what were you going to do about the functions, the useful functions that OPR did perform? I'm with you on the broader question, but the CEQA clearinghouse, the planning and coordination, especially in light of SB 375 and some of those other planning, are still things that need to be housed, I think, through the governor's office in whatever form, in whatever thing you want to call this.
All three versions preserve the existing CEQA clearinghouse, which is a very small staff that plays an important role in CEQA process. There are a variety of other functions, though, that OPR is charged with doing in statute, some of which have been performed less well or not as well over time. And I think that at least for some of those functions, as the houses move forward, you're probably going to have to think about staffing up OPR if you want to maintain those functions and have those tasks perform well.
The four functions the Senate was trying to preserve was the clearinghouse, environmental planning and coordination, the volunteer program, because it brings in a ton of federal money, and the small business, although I still question the need for a secretary to do that, nonetheless, the volunteer program has value.
And both
the
houses,
small business advisor.
And both houses' versions preserve all of those activities in the existing OPR.
But what other activities does finance want to, or where were you going to send them, or what do you want to do?
Our original proposal had preserved, as the LAO points out, the CEQA planning process, the small business advocate, and then a handful of other functions, including some legislative analysis and some web work that is currently performed by on behalf of the governor's office. There were, at the request of Senate Sub 4, OPR completed a report that addressed all of the other statutory requirements that it has, and they did make a recommendation that much of that could be performed by the Strategic Growth Council. But and so that was kind of the open question, I think, that was dealt with in the subcommittee process.
The difference between the Senate and the governor's only...
It's a very small dollar difference.
It's a couple positions, so... Mr. Blumenfield?
Yeah, we're still working on this. We want to keep it open. We know there's a compromise in the works. I just think the timing is very interesting of this for the governor's proposal, that it goes into effect the day that he leaves office after all these years of having OPR and using it. I find that very interesting. When last year we tried to get rid of it, and it was a whole political issue. That being said, just to get that in, there is certainly it certainly needs some major reform, and I look forward to next pass really getting the exact language that we need to do it. So I'd ask us to move on.
Okay, anybody else want to contribute to the discussion before we leave it open? All right, hearing none. Move on. Page 5, IT contracts. LAO, somebody? Anybody?
So for this one, the Assembly adopted placeholder trailer bill language and placeholder appropriation to expand the oversight role of BSA over large, high-risk IT projects. For us, this issue brings into question the current oversight responsibilities over large IT projects between BSA, OCIO, and other state agencies, as well as BSA's current workload and available resources. We think that JLAC and other policy committees may want to think about the overall oversight responsibilities for IT projects of these agencies, particularly BSA's role in the process, and without prejudice to the merits of the proposal, we recommend adopting the Senate position and sending the issue to JLAC and the other policy committees for closer inspection.
I think the issue, in part, at least from our perspective, would be that the OCIO has this responsibility. We've just got that more or less under control. They are doing what they're supposed to do. I'm not quite sure why we would include the Bureau of State Audits and sort of complicate the lines of oversight. But do you, Mr. Bloomfield?
Well, I think we should just move on. I mean, we're holding this one open, ideally, where there's some additional conversations that should get settled soon on this.
Mr. Dutton? Okay. All right, we'll leave it open for right now. OCIO is super opposed to this, so you came to see me yesterday.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We're leaving a lot of stuff open.
Oh, unfortunate. Well, see if we can, as long as everybody gets out what their issue is, we can come back to them quickly, hopefully. EHAP, emergency housing finance.
Yes, we're proposing to transfer $4.2 million to the general fund. Notwithstanding the merits of the EHAP program, this will help the general fund.
Yeah, as painful as it was. I mean, I think we've done that the last couple of years. The EHAP program hasn't actually functioned for about 3 or 4 years during this crisis, right?
Last year it functioned was 2007.
LAO?
We concur with the Senate action.
Anybody? Mr. Lowenthal.
Yeah, I understand that, we shouldn't, our fiscal crisis, and I just have a hard time in an economically difficult time of getting rid of emergency shelters. I mean, this is this is where the rubber meets the road. This is not a lot of money. This is to keep people alive in the winter. I'm gonna support keeping them alive.
I don't know if would the department actually put out the grants if the loan is not. They haven't done it for 3 years.
I know.
And the governor vetoed an appropriation in this regard in 08-09, if I recall correctly.
Well, the assembly language requires them to put out the money.
Oh, I see. Yes, Mr. Lano?
There are no federal funds or any other pots to turn to?
They've been substituted.
There were some federal funds for what was called rapid rehousing. That program works in transition housing to help prevent homelessness and to help transition people back into permanent shelter. Slightly different, but...
I think the concern here is if we don't have this in the general fund, then you'll create more homeless folks in things like CalWorks if you went along with some of the governor's other proposals. I mean, it's a difficult discussion because these are the funds that help operations. These aren't capital funds. These are operations funds. I don't know.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Eric Johnson with the Legislative Analyst's Office. Our understanding is that, this is not all of the funding that homeless shelters get. They haven't been receiving this funding for the last 3 years.
And they've been open.
And they have been open. And in light of the current budget situation, notwithstanding the merits of the program, of course, we believe that every dollar that we can help the general fund ought to be used for the general fund.
How much percentage is this of the total funding, the general fund portion?
There's no funding for the program and hasn't been any,
I understand,
any
but
general fund
if
program.
it was in there, what have we provided in the past and what are we looking at?
I believe Department of Housing and Community Development estimates it's about 10% of shelter funding.
Thank you.
So most shelter funding is coming from the local level and from nonprofits and from federal funds at the moment.
That's correct.
So it's not a huge reduction in the program to not do this, which is why we've managed the last 3 years not to do it. Mr. Blumenfield?
I mean, they're stretched pretty thin, and one thing we could do is change our language to trailer bill language to make sure that the money gets out the door and doesn't get blue pencil.
No, that doesn't help, I don't think.
No, we would still have the concerns about the general fund.
They would still pencil the trailer.
Yeah, that would still be a general fund cost in theory because we wouldn't be transferring the funds to the general fund. So in that case, we would still support the Senate version.
I'm okay with the Senate version.
Mr. Nielsen moves the Senate version. Mr. Lowenthal is a no on the Senate side. What else? Anybody else? You're okay? Okay, 4-1 on the Senate side.
We want the Assembly version.
They want the Assembly version. Okay, so that motion fails on a 2-3 on the Assembly side. We'll leave it open for now and see where we get to. I don't know if we can figure out. I mean, the problem is if we can find a substitute in the general fund, then I don't think anybody disagrees with the program. The problem is whether we have a substitute $4 million someplace hiding in here. Finding more positions. All right. In the quest to find more positions. Infill infrastructure. Housing, finance. Oh, this isn't a finance deal. LAO.
Yes, so HCD has indicated that the funding could be released immediately if it were to go through HCD. This is funding that was identified as savings from a program, a grant program from Prop 1C, roughly $9 million worth. The Senate took action to appropriate the funding through the infill infrastructure grant program. The Assembly divided the funding between the infill infrastructure grant program and another program that has received some money from this program through Cal Reuse, California Recycle Underutilized Sites Program. We recommend the Senate action because of our understanding that HCD indicating that the money could go out immediately, whereas the Cal Reuse program would have to go reissue a NOFA.
Madam Chair, we concur with the ledge analyst that we would support the Senate action here.
Okay.
And one of the issues, Madam Chair, is it not that these other sites are not shovel ready, and we need to get the funding behind it.
I think the effort here was part of the overall jobs push to get as much out as we can to things that are ready to be built.
To go.
Senator Dutton?
Yeah, my only concern is, especially being as I was one of two Senate Republican votes that actually took this out of the Senate, was that there was a lot of work done on these bonds, and this actually would change what the agreed-to use was and what was represented to the people. So I would like to see us stay with the Senate version, which is consistent with what was agreed to back when the bonds were originally negotiated.
All right. Senator Dutton moves the Senate version. Oh, Mr. Leno.
What of the Cal Reuse grants that have already been authorized or have been given indication to locals that they were moving forward? Is anyone going to have the rug pulled out from under them?
The Cal Reuse program was allocated $60 million of Prop 1C bonds through a bill authored by Senator Dutton. So the funding that was made available has been available for that program. So we're not.
That does not change.
That does not change.
Good to know.
I think the problem is most of it's been used and there's more projects out there. But the same is true in the IIG, and the IIG is what this was drafted for, and it is for projects that are shovel-ready. So Senator Dutton moves the Senate version. Hearing no objection, on a 5-0 vote, that will be approved. Public Works Board. This is the Governor trailer bill language, Finance.
Teresa Gunn, Department of Finance. This is the language necessary for the Public Works Board to help us provide interim financing for projects. As you're aware, the Pooled Money Investment Board shut down the loan program that this program was using to fund infrastructure projects in the most recent past. Since it's shut down, we have more than 50 projects that are stopped and cannot be restarted without another funding source to get them going. Projects have to be sufficiently far enough along in the design and construction of them in order for us to sell the bonds for them. This proposal would provide us that financing source for both projects that are currently in the budget and potentially those stopped projects to authorize, to enable them to move forward.
LAO.
This is a complicated sounding proposal that actually is similar to what other governments do. It essentially allows the state to use its equity in already completed projects to kind of use as collateral for our lease revenue bonds and to get those projects going. Mr. Nielsen asked on Friday about approaches that could help move infrastructure. This is one of them on the agenda. For example, later you'll be looking at higher education projects for the universities, and this proposal is one that does have a prospect of moving some of those quicker than they would otherwise be able to move by basically giving a financing source for planning and design and to getting the projects going. So we recommend approving the governor's proposal. You might want to consider having a sunset so that it could be evaluated, perhaps 3 years, after which time new projects would not be able to have this technique applied to them unless the trailer bill is extended.
Finance?
Yes. We're okay with the sunset provision, although we would, of course, prefer not to. The asset transfer is expected to be one of our permanent solutions because the PUMIB board is not expected to open up and fully operate as it was before in funding these projects, and this is one of the funding mechanisms that we are hoping to use for that. If you can't see fit to not put a sunset in, we would ask that you do at least 5 years to give us sufficient time to collect data to measure its effectiveness.
3 years.
So we really only sell twice a year.
An issue with Finance's 5-year sunset?
I'd go with the sunset. I think they've made a compelling case about moving these projects along.
Yeah, but I do think we need a sunset because you can't do this forever without knowing what you're doing. So 5 years? Mm-hmm. You okay? Yeah. Well, on a 5-0 vote, Finance trailer bill language with a 5-year sunset. Page 9. Finance.
Jesse McGuinn, the Department of Finance. This is a proposal to make permanent 30 positions, one in the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, 29 in Department of Industrial Relations. The Senate approved it. The Assembly made them 1-year limited term.
All right.
These have been here for 5 years.
Mr. Blumenfield moves the Senate version. Is there any objection to the Senate version approving the governor's request? Hearing none, on a 5-0 vote, that will be approved. Disability insurance, page 10. Oh, this one's probably going to be...
This is the Assembly's proposal for the loan.
Well, there was originally the Finance proposal, then there's the Assembly proposal, and the Senate said no to it all. So...
Right. We had loaned money to the Employment Training Fund for a jobs initiative program and a training program. The Assembly included this in their new jobs package.
LAO? Sorry.
Yes, Madam Chair. Charity Spiritu with the Legislative Analyst Office. As you know, this is a part of a broader jobs package, and we only add that on a technical level. The fund is sufficient to accommodate this level of borrowing.
Well, folks who pay into the fund would dispute that, I think, but I mean, the question of the propriety of borrowing from this fund at all, given current conditions, and that employees pay into it, employers pay into it, and it is designed for a specific purpose, which is to ensure disabled workers have funds.
Right, and the governor's proposal with loaning it to the Employment Training Fund was changing the revenues in the Employment Training Fund to then repay that loan. The Assembly version is a little bit...
Which is an increase on employers.
We'll make it easy. We'll move the Senate.
Mr. Blumenfield moves the Senate version.
All right.
Senator Dutton confers. All right, on a 5-0 vote, Senate action is confirmed.
This is which one, the Assembly version?
We took the Senate.
Oh, we took the Senate version.
Good man.
All right. Workforce Investment Act, page 11. This one, I think, do we have the chart yet? Oh, there we go. LAO, to the rescue.
Yes, Madam Chair. As requested by the Chair, we prepared a handout to discuss the governor's plan for the Workforce Investment Act expenditures. So essentially what's going on here is that in 2009-10, the Federal Workforce Investment Act and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act provided about $1 billion in funding for California's workforce system. And so now in 2010-11, the Recovery Act is no longer available, and the base funding for Workforce Investment Act was reduced. Federal law requires that 85% of this total funding goes to the locals, and 15% of this funding is reserved for state discretionary purposes. And so on the next pages of the handout, you can see a table that basically shows you a comparison of the governor's expenditure plan for Workforce Investment Act in 2009 and comparing it with the plan for 2010-11. So really on the last page of this handout on the bottom, you can see that in 2009-10-11, we had about $141 million in total funding, including the Recovery Act funding for our workforce system. This is just the 15% pot. So about 140, yeah.
So the total that is the discretionary fund is $73 million, am I reading this right?
That's right. For 2010, 2011, we
had 140 in 9-10 because of the era of supplement.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
And so both houses appropriated the $73 million. The issue in conference is the allocation of these funds. Yeah. And we advise that the legislature should review this plan and potentially modify the allocation of these funds according to your legislative priorities, including creating some potential general fund savings opportunities.
I mean, the question is, where do we get the biggest bang for limited dollars that help us with other pieces of the budget? We had asked for this list because this was our concern, was how do we do this? The one in particular, the parolee services has been of some concern, that we actually fund that since CDCR is no longer doing much of that. And I don't know, we've got multiple health care ones here. We have what's the at-risk youthful gang offender prevention? Is that jobs for, who runs that? What is sector initiative?
We'll need to come back with you on what that is. That's continuation.
Yeah, and this economic stimulus, so-called, but it's only $200,000. I'm just trying to, it seems like we may want to concentrate some of these funds into some specific things that really help us move the economy forward, and I don't know how to evaluate looks like you have two different pots for this at-risk youthful gang thing. There's no money for summer bridge employment. The parolee services fund is reduced by half. I get that it's half as much money, but nonetheless, that may be a priority after we get through talking about corrections. And I don't know what incentive grants are and who they're incentivizing. I mean, we may want to concentrate some of these, not spread it out so far among so many, given that there's so little resources. I don't know what other members think, but maybe we sort of for caucus staff work group. I don't know, Senator Dutton.
I personally I'm just want to get people back to work. I don't really care.
Well, but that's the question.
And I think training needs to be done for jobs that exist today, and not. Anyway, so we kind of favor the assembly version, but.
So, which is the governor's?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Because do you think these things create jobs? I mean, I'm not convinced any of these do that, I guess is what I'm concerned about. So.
Actually, preference would be is that this would be going to existing jobs that exist today so that we don't lose them. But, I mean,
Well, and it's not all about training. I think that's the point, is how do we get people in, or get them trained for jobs that do exist so they can get into them. And if we're using at-risk populations, that helps us on some other fronts in the budget. But I don't know. I don't know. We hadn't seen this till today, so.
Just hold it open.
Yeah, I think we just hold it open. I just want to make sure if anybody had any comments. Mr.
Well,
Nelson?
isn't this kind of a bias to more, shall I say, rehabilitative, help people kind of things, but really not getting them employed out in the community in private sector jobs? Am I right?
Could be. Let us at least understand all of these programs better. I mean, that's the point. The point is to get parolees working so they're less likely to cost us more in prisons recidivizing. That's the parolee piece. And there may be similar pieces for CalWORKs recipients or for that could be done that kind of have a double bang for us, at least, or veterans, or there's ways of looking at this, and I don't know how much we need and understand the health care question. But there seem to be multiple ones in the same area, and some of them are just sort of scattered monies. And if you're not going to put the green collar jobs, we know we're good. So anyway, I just think we need to look at it. So all right, let's talk about it some more. We'll leave it open for today. Yeah, it's multiple staff, LAO, finance. We'll just kind of, for caucus staff discussion. At least help us understand what all the different ones do, and let's see if we can kind of sort through where we think the money can best be targeted. That's the issue, rather than scattered.
Madam Chair, could we also maybe take a look at on-the-job training type programs too that would be eligible for this? So.
Sure, works for me. Yeah. I don't know what the local WIB boards do. They do some OJT? I mean, OJT is one of the programs that was subsumed into WIA, but
that's a lot of 85% of the money does go to local workforce investment boards, so they can target the needs in their local areas.
But are some of them doing on-the-job training, like Senator Dutton suggested?
I'll have to confirm that.
That's what we need to check. I mean, that's been the biggest problem with this program all along, is that it goes out locally and nobody's quite sure. Some of them spend it more wisely than others. That's the issue. All right. Page 12. Oh, our famous unemployment compensation project. Elia, or finance?
Well, we can go into detail if need be. We support the Senate version. The Senate's based on information that wasn't available at the time when we put our proposal together. For example, the federal changes on the extension of benefits, and so we support the Senate.
Oh, okay. All right, what do we do?
We're good with Senate. We move to Senate.
Mr. Blumenfield moves the Senate version. The OF concurrence and a 5-0 vote. That will be approved. Page 13. Finance.
This provisional language simply adds a notification to the JLBC in the event that the the revenues that the vendor brings in are insufficient, we would, to pay his bills, we would reduce the appropriation authority. The Senate has requested that we added JLBC notification to the proposal.
Is there any issue with that by anybody?
We're good.
Hearing none, the Senate version is approved 5050, simply modifying the governor assembly version. Apprenticeship.
Madam Chair, this is another issue where this is a program where the staff in this program respond to complaints. The number of projects has increased dramatically. There's been a recent approval of the release of bond funds. We proposed the governor's budget included permanent positions. The Assembly made them one-year limited term.
Jenny, Senator Leno moves the Senate version. Any issues?
We're okay with it.
All right. On a 5-0? 5050?
No.
Oops, no, Mr. Nielsen isn't a 5-0 on the Senate side. 3-2 on the Assembly side. That will be approved. All right. Page 15.
It's a big one.
Senator Leno moves the Assembly version. Does anybody have any issues with that?
Madam Chair, I understand that this was a part of the budget agreement last year at leadership level. I'd be reluctant to undo something that was an agreement last year, so I would be a no vote on this kind of motion.
Madam Chair.
But they haven't done anything with it all year, is my understanding, Finance?
Madam Chair, they have begun some work. They've hired 4 people and begun the initial work to do a survey. If this is the money is rejected, they would not have funds to continue.
Madam Chair, both houses eliminated the funding for the survey already, and so this is just about the Assembly side adding
the
language.
budget bill language, which makes the Assembly version. Mr. Huff.
Yeah, just on the lines of what my colleague across the way said, we need votes to get this thing out. If we start worming out of the deals that we have cut to get previous budgets done, you won't get any other budgets done in this building.
Yeah, well, some people renege on CalWorks
Yeah, but
retention
those decisions cost leadership positions. So think carefully about what you do on this item.
How would this one have written? I don't know what this.
Well, the survey was part of the negotiated settlement last year.
So was preserving CalWorks and IHSS. And that didn't get us anywhere. So was preserving child welfare services, which the governor then vetoed all the money for.
We're not closed out on CalWorks.
No, but the governor vetoed 50 things that were part of that agreed settlement. So let's not kid ourselves about who did what to who here.
And also the settlement was in a time and a place, and the circumstances are very different now with the economy, and there's no reason to move forward with this survey right now. So.
Well, I'm just telling you, if you want some good faith, don't back out on deals negotiated last year. CalWorks is not settled out. This was something that was negotiated very strongly by Senator Cogdill, who did not want to go up on that budget. But he got some things that he thought was worthwhile. So for you to go back on that was negotiated last year is a slap in his face, and everything that we stand for when we compromise our values to support these terrible budgets.
Well, we want to move the Assembly version, but...
Yeah, I understand. We would support the Assembly version to the extent that...
Let me take a different approach here for a minute here, because the problem you have with prevailing wage in California is it's unique in the way we determine it. Okay, it's not according to Davis-Bacon on the federal side of things. It's not done on a per-county basis. It's done on a regional. And what happens is the rural areas generally have a disadvantage when it's applied to them, because Central Valley has to pay a higher rate than it normally would because it's locked into other regions. And so that's where the unfairness comes about, and I think that's where parts of this come into play. And then also the other problem we have, too, is to use the same rate for residential as you do for some of the more industrial or commercial-type public works projects is also not a fair analysis. So I think that's the reason why it should be done, and regardless of whether it's a budget deal or not, just common sense should tell you that we ought to maybe take a look at this, and I'm not saying do away with prevailing wage, but maybe follow more of the federal requirements of it as opposed to California's unique way of doing business.
Well, the issue on this has been around for as long as I've been here.
Continue to be around.
And the problem is equally interesting in the desert areas and in Imperial Valley and Coachella Valley and Riverside and San Bernardino and other areas that are non-coastal, because the rates tend to be tied to coastal wages. But the question of whether we ought to be funding separate general fund when the governor's had 5 years to do this administratively and they haven't done it is sort of troubling, and why we would dedicate precious general fund dollars right now to doing something that the department has the authority to do under existing law, could have done any time in the last 15 years, and just hasn't, is sort of the troubling piece here for me. But Ms. Conway?
Thank you, Senator. Well, I'm not here to defend or reprimand anybody for what they did or didn't do. It's just this is a constant problem, not just for prevailing wage, for having lived in the Central Valley most of my life. And I do also represent 25,000 square miles of desert and part of San Bernardino and a whole area. This issue falls into every walk of life, everything we do, because we have a different economy, a different scale, a different ability to even function in the Central Valley compared to Northern and Southern California, which we're constantly compared to. And it flows over, I mean, not only into government issues, but private sector, however you want to look at it. It's, we're known as the Valley of Poverty. We're poorer than Appalachia by any survey, any area you want to look at it, and it just makes it very difficult to even complete projects. This is just very important to the Central Valley, and I would prevail upon the committee to.
We'll leave it open for a minute, but I don't know why we're picking them out separate. And I also, if you're going to do a survey, do it. But they've had the ability to do that for the last 8 years, and suddenly it's like I need a special general fund appropriation to do my job, and that's a little bit frustrating to me.
Open.
Why haven't they done it?
We'll leave it open for right now. Page 16, Finance.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we started to discuss this, I think it was yesterday. This is $8.4 million general fund and then some special fund, primarily in order to help out the county veteran service officers to get the veterans to the CVSOs and then get them enrolled on federal benefits.
Yeah, but it's a general fund appropriation to do something new when we don't have any money to do what we do today. LAO?
Sean Martin with the Legislative Analyst Office.
Okay, everybody.
Without prejudice to the merits of the policy that would be implemented through Operation Welcome Home, we're recommending the Senate due to concerns about the general fund.
All right. Anybody? I mean, we wanted to send money directly to the CVSOs, but I just don't know how you justify this much money for at this particular moment in time when we're not funding the services that will serve those same veterans. Employment services, you name it. Members, I don't know. Anybody? Want to leave it open? Ms. Conway? Ms. Conway, did you have a comment?
Well, I'm in favor. It seems to me we discussed something yesterday, Senator Leno, do you remember? That we didn't do, but we were looking towards maybe doing this instead. It was something to do with veterans. Does anybody remember that?
It was the DMV.
Was I here yesterday?
Yes, you were here. It was the DMV
stuff.
The question of how would we use DMV resources to outreach to veterans kind of blends into this one. Whether DMV could do it was kind of an issue, and maybe some portion of it. I mean, CVSOs do a great job, but
I think it was in DMV we were looking at.
It was DMV, yeah. It was the whether the DMV should be figuring out who veterans are and therefore kind of helping to hook them up. CVSOs do a good job with this, but the issue is the $8 million in general fund.
Yeah, and we looked at some other options like whether EDD could help, and they have helped by hiring some of the veterans. But as far as like getting them services through the one-stop shops, et cetera, But ultimately, it came down to there's really not any other fund sources to help the CVSOs help these people fill out the applications and get the federal benefits.
Yeah, well, and the federal government should be funding that, too. We ought to be looking for some federal funds to help this out. Mr. Leno and then Senator Dutton.
License plate revenue? Is there license plate revenue that could be used?
John Fitzpatrick, Department of Finance. Some funding from the license plate revenue fund is being proposed for an SIAS. It's the IT system that would allow the department to collect veterans' demographic information and assist the CVOs in performing these activities. The funding, $768,000 to be available for 3 years, is coming from the license plate fund.
The $768,000 is from the license plate
Correct.
fund.
And
that's on top of the 8.4.
And how much is in that fund total? Or how much does it get annually?
I don't have the current fund balance, but obviously we've determined that that $768,000 amount would not leave the balance in a weak position.
Well, would you have enough to also add $300,000 or $400,000 to the CVSOs for ongoing operations as from the license plate fund rather than from the general fund?
An additional augmentation of that amount would be something that the fund could support ongoing.
Well, why don't we look at that fund's condition, Mr. Dutton, and see what we can get
sorry,
out of
just
there.
to clarify, in the $300,000 to $400,000 range, which I believe was a discussion associated with the Senate subcommittee hearing.
Okay, Mr. Dutton.
You know, this issue also came up when I was talking to some of the community college board of governors, because the community college system back in the 70s used to have a really aggressive program in coordination with the feds on veterans' rights and stuff. And I know they're beefing that up right now. Has anybody talked to them about maybe joining forces with them? Because that would be a good source. Most of the veterans may end up going into the community college system, and then we actually could make sure that they get access or knowledge as to where the other benefits are.
Certainly, the Operation Welcome Home effort is a collaborative effort that's including as many stakeholders as possible. It is continuing to evolve, and certainly if different entities are identified that could help the process along, they presumably would be.
All right, let's leave it open. I mean, everybody wants to do this, but I don't know about the general fund money. Why don't we take a look at that fund and just make sure what it could support as a movement in the right direction. Our suggestion was somewhere in the $300,000, $400,000 range. So, and they would get to do the computer system deal, which probably would help them be more efficient, and track people might avoid the DMV issue, and maybe look at maybe one component of that DMV thing or something, not all three. I don't think about that one as a combination. All right, page 17. This reservoir, what is this doing in Veterans Affairs? Oh, yes, Yountville. All right. Assembly, or LAO, you want to explain?
Certainly. The Assembly approved trailer bill language authorizing the Department of Veterans Affairs to sell surplus water from the Rector Creek Reservoir. Budget bill language specifying that the revenue from the sale of surplus water from the Rector Creek Reservoir or the renegotiation of the Ventnors Golf Course lease shall be used to augment funding for county veteran service offices or the Pathway Home, and also supplemental report language. We recommend that this be sent to Policy Committee since it raises some questions about water usage.
The water piece of it's a little, I don't know how we declare something as surplus water. What is the Pathway Home? It says CVSO, or maybe there's some money here for the CVSOs.
With respect to the Ventnors.
Hang on. The Pathway Home is a program that was funded from some private grant funding to provide some program to people returning from Iraq and Afghanistan 3 years ago.
Okay. And that private funding?
Well, there's about 3 months' worth, I think, in the 10-11 fiscal year, and so we're working to try to get some additional funding. What this was, well, in the next item, there's language that we had proposed that would allow us to use general fund if we can't secure additional.
Oh, this is that one. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the issue on page 18.
Yeah, we were suggesting a bridge loan while you look for federal funding, perhaps to have it not lose
Right,
the infrastructure while you're moving forward.
So page
but
17 was trying to find some other ways to provide funding.
direct
Yes.
funding to that. All right. Anybody or Assembly? This was your. You want to? I don't know. It's a little. How much? I mean, we don't know what all these are, right? I mean, this water finance. You have a view on some of these water issues and such.
While we very much support efforts to increase and to have revenue materialize, especially to augment these programs, which the administration has proposed new funding for, we're quite concerned that this language would really have an impact. Particularly because although a short-term transfer in water code is allowable to circumvent some of the more difficult regulatory hurdles and environmental hurdles, there was a protest filed, cease and desist, in 2004. The city of Yountville uses some of the water from Rector Reservoir in exchange for providing sewage treatment services. The city of Yountville, back in 2004, expanded the area to which water is provided for a new subdivision. The Department of Fish and Game protested that expansion. There was a cease and desist order filed. The city does not provide water to that area, which is outside the geographic boundaries of the current license. The department followed up with a petition to amend the license. The protest and the petition are still unresolved. The State Water Board has indicated that even in a situation where a short-term water transfer would be sought, it's unlikely that they would move forward on it with an existing protest and petition unresolved.
What about the golf course? That seems more promising. The water's kind of.
The golf course is currently in the midst of a 30-year lease. It provides about $60,000 a year as part of that lease. However, the developer involved in creating the golf course, in the development of the golf course, is now recouping the costs that they incurred up front. It would be very unlikely that they would have an incentive to break open that contract to pay more at this point.
Madam Chair, couldn't we at least remand this temporarily, if not longer term, to a policy discussion? And I'd be happy to work with Assemblywoman Noreen Evans on this. It's a local issue, and I'm kind of familiar with it.
Are you? I have no. I mean, I can tell it's a local issue. I don't want to mess around in Santa Rosa politics. I mean, water politics. That would be. But let's at least leave it open and then see if the LEO is correct. Maybe we refer the whole thing to Policy Committee at some point. I don't know how to think about whether some portion of this may be appropriate. Mr. Blumenfield?
Let's leave it open.
We'll just leave it open. All right, till we see if we can understand it better. Page 18.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is the one I just discussed. As I mentioned, the private funding is running out in 10-11. We're hopeful that we can continue to work with whether it be Napa County to maybe use some of their Prop 63 funding or other private donations. But in the event that we can't, solicit private funds, we propose language to allow us to basically backfill the program to continue through 10-11.
I guess what the Senate was thinking about was federal monies should become available in October after the federal budget is passed, and if there was a need for a bridge, we sort of thought of it as a bridge loan until the federal funds from the Omnibus Health, Veterans Health Omnibus Health Service Act come into play and perhaps would fund the program. I mean, it is their responsibility, and much as we care for our veterans in this state, we really want them to pay for these return from Iraq kinds of deals. I don't know, finance.
Madam Chair, if I may, just to reiterate the point that we'd be concerned that the absent an additional larger amount of money, this program wouldn't be able to continue its operations. It is trying to extend as long as possible operations and streamlining where possible. In addition to hopes that federal money will materialize, there is Prop 63 mental health funding available that would be additional money that would be available to Napa County, but there would be a timely process to access those
What's
additional
the status of the federal monies in the Caregivers and Vets Omnibus Health Services Act? I mean, there ought to be federal money. We ought to have a program that we can administer through however this program is being administered, but, there are a million privately funded things like homeless shelters and this and privately and otherwise nonprofit funded things going on throughout the state. If we backfilled every single one of them for general fund, there wouldn't be anything left to run the schools. Mr. Lowenthal.
Especially what you said. I mean, as worthy as this is a federal responsibility.
And it's been funded by private funds for the last 3 years without state. We've been down this path before, where something gets started and suddenly they don't have any money, and then we're on the hook to fund it. I don't know.
How about if we just split the difference and close the item and make it $800,000 loan instead of $300,000?
As a loan. But as a loan?
Yeah.
I mean, our idea was a bridge loan while you find other money. It wasn't to actually backfill the program on an ongoing basis, which is what, so. The loan or the, Mr. Nielsen? I don't know. Yeah, good try. It's an up-to loan was the concept we had, just because we just don't want it to fall through the cracks while it's waiting for other funding, but we also didn't want to be on the hook for. So I just leave it open. I think that's a concept. The need is $1.3 million. There's no question.
If we are considering the bridge loan concept, is the $300,000 going to be insufficient, and we must go to $800,000, or might the $300,000 work?
I think the problem is that the current language is written as such that we can't get the bridge loan until the non-state funding is secured. And so, in theory, they can't even spend that. But we would suggest that they would need, without knowing how much additional private funds or federal funds they're going to get, we think the program need.
Well, where's the private funders that have been there? What did they all just drop off the planet this year, or what? All right, let's leave it open, see if we can find out more about who's been funding it and see if we can find the $1 million. Maybe somebody would ask one of the gubernatorial candidates. All right. Page 19.
Yeah, just
they got $100 million.
One commercial they could put aside.
One commercial. We could be over the top after tomorrow. Maybe people will have extra money after tomorrow. All right, page 19.
The last three pages of the agenda all await CalPERS's decisions next week on 2010-11 state pension contribution rates and 2011 state retiree and employee health rates. These are technical items, and so they essentially budget what has to move through the system over the next year. Pension reform and related issues are certainly important topics, and we certainly encourage you to discuss them. But these are technical items.
These are what they are when the number gets here that's here.
That's right. And so you have two choices here. You could close these items now and let staff score these next week when the dollars are available, come back to you with any problems, or alternatively, we could give you the best numbers that we have when you go through the last pass of the book. Typically, our office, Finance and DPA, can work to try to reconcile the numbers within a few days of CalPERS making the decision.
Why don't we just leave it open until we get all those numbers next week, and then we'll close it as soon as we know what the numbers are. All right, that leaves those three open. We're through the general government members. We were hoping to, why don't we take a 15-minute break and come back and do public safety?
Oh, yeah.
Pardon?